Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to each and every one of you at today's event. I'm Jai, your host for the day. First and foremost, it is our pleasure to welcome our first keynote speaker for today, Mr. Lam Kai Sun from Cheng & Co Group. Mr. Lam will be sharing the insights into the introduce of e-invoices, discussing their impact and ultimately providing a breakdown of the strategic measures that businesses can implement in response. Let's welcome Mr. Lam Kai Sun.
Okay, I think e-invoicing announced in last year, not last year, the year before last, 2023 budget at time. The government and IRB announced that they're going to implement the e-invoicing, and the timeline that they're going to implement is talking about the 3 years timeline. By 2027, they're going to implement to all the business that are compulsory to implement the e-invoice. But in the latest budget 2024, I think many people noticed that the timeline cut shortened because I believe that they don't want to create more confusion during the 3 years time. That's why now they cut the timeline to 1.5 years. I think the timeline talking about e-invoicing for those business. This is the timeline that newly announced in the budget 2024. For those business more than 100 million turnover, they were going to implement the e-invoice compulsory by on 1st of August 2024 this year. Then for those business turnover between 25 million to 100 million, they're going to implement is the next year January. And those others business turnover below 25 million, they will be implement on 1st of July 2025 next year. So we are talking now to July 2025. I think it's less than 18 months, especially for those all the SME. And how to determine that your company when you need to implement the e-invoice is based on your the turnover amount. And talking about the turnover amount, we refer to your 2022 audit report figures. So based on your audit report figures of 2022, if your turnover is below 25 million, then by 1st of July 2025, you have to get ready to implement the e-invoice for the next year. And I believe the e-invoice, many people may think about maybe only the accounting department are relevant, and they're also thinking about maybe just change or maybe upgrade the invoicing system. That is good enough. In fact, I think the e-invoice may impact a wider scope, not only accounting department, and also not only talking about upgrade the so-called the invoicing system, etc. So later I will share more about what is the implication for those SOP internal process, and also talking about the system-wise. Okay. Now, talking about the invoicing system, I think we have a few stage. I think previously, many years ago, I think we are talking about using a manual issuing the invoice paper. You issue invoice manually, you hand over your invoice to your customer, and then either you hand over or you post to them, then wait for them to receive the invoice and arrange for payment, etc. This one is a very initial stage of invoicing. Then I think currently many people go into the second stage, is talking about invoice in the PDF. The system they're using accounting software issue invoice. They create the invoice in the PDF format and send through email to the customer, and also by print out, also hand over to a customer. This is the current many people practice using the PDF format, send over the invoice. I think now talking about e-invoice is not only talking about PDF format, it's talking about the data transmitting between the system without any physical invoice format or even the PDF format. So I think here you can see that e-invoice is talking about your account receivable issue or invoice, and the system that will transmit the data directly to the IRB portal. We call it a My Invoice portal. So that's why IRB will process your invoice and validate the invoice data and send back the invoice to you with the validated QR code. This is what they are going to implement in Malaysia, the version of our e-invoice. So it's an exchange of data between the system without any PDF or physical invoice format. This is the concept of the Malaysia e-invoice. I think Malaysia is not the first country implement the e-invoice. Many other countries already have implemented. It's just that the version are slightly different. Okay. Now this is what the IRB make available to the public, the information. You can see the process of the e-invoicing. Firstly, I think the business, they will issue the invoice using their system, or you can using their IRB system. Means that if let's say I do not have an invoicing system, then I can go to IRB border, log in, using their border to issue invoice is also allowable for those business if let's say they do not want to use any accounting software, etc. So they issue invoice if let's say they're using their own software. So they will send the data to the income tax border, my invoice border, through the API or whatever system. Then IRB will validate your invoice and send you back and give you the notification that already validate the invoice with the QR code sent back to you, and then you can share this invoice to your customer. Okay, then you can see your customer side, so we will receive the invoice. If maybe people may ask, if let's say after receiving invoice, maybe after customer checking there are some error, maybe the quantity is not correct or whatever, they still manage to cancel the invoice. According to the guideline issued by the IRB, the timeline that you can cancel the invoice is within 72 hours that you can request to cancel the invoice. Then you may ask, if let's say so happen after 72 hours only you discover the maybe mistake or error in the invoice, then how to adjust back the invoice? I think the CN is still allowed to issue. All the credit note still go through the same process. The taxpayer or business issue the credit note still go through the transmitting the data to IRB border to validate by IRB the CN. Then only the CN you share with your customer, whatever purpose for the, I think the CN maybe for discount given, for goods return, adjustment for the invoice amount, etc. It still can be allowable to issue the CN, but have to go through the same process. Okay, then this one will be the IRB border. So the border will capture all the data, means that every day you issue in invoice, so all the daily data will transmit to IRB border, and IRB border will capture all your sales data. And not only your sales data, I believe this border also capture all your purchase data and your expenses data. Because why? Your supplier also will go through the same process. Your supplier also issue the invoice to you, and the supplier also same thing go through the process, transmit the data to IRB border, get the validation, and share the invoice to you. So I would say that after implementing the e-invoice, the IRB system will have, I think, most of your income and expenses data. So roughly IRB will know about your profit every year in the future based on this system data collection. Okay, so I think talking about e-invoice, in fact we have two type of system talking about e-invoicing implemented by income tax. Just now I mentioned that one is talking about scenario one. You go through the issuing invoice, transmit data to IRB border, validation, then share the invoice to your customer. Then another one, we have a scenario two is talking about those taxpayer, they may choose to using the consolidation approach. Means that you do not transmit the data every day. You at least compile all your invoice data, let's say at least 7 days. At least 7 days. Only you share this 7 days data with the IRB. But the scenario two, I think the disadvantage will be those customers who receive the invoice from those business using scenario two, the customer cannot get tax deduction for their tax purpose. Means that for scenario two, I think many those retailer they may want to use a scenario 2 because why? Like a mini market or supermarket. So every day there are so many customers that they come in to buy goods from them. And e-invoice, the requirement will be all the invoicing you must put in the buyer name, buyer income tax number, address, etc. Later I will share with you what are the fields that you need to fill into the e-invoice. For those retailer will be very troublesome. Every customer also request their information will be very troublesome, and the volume are very big for those hypermarket and supermarket and other retailer. That's why they allow those retailer they can use a scenario 2, console the invoice data at least 7 days, then only submit, share to the income tax portal, the my invoice portal. So this one, the disadvantage will be the customer cannot get tax deduction. Then how about those customers? Sometimes they want to buy goods from the mini market for the company purpose, and they want to claim for income tax purpose for the company as a company expenses. In such a scenario, then the customer have to request e-invoice from those supermarket or mini market for those retailer if they want to claim income tax deduction for business purpose. So means that for those customer who request e-invoice, they have to provide the particular like the company name, address, income tax number, etc. to the retailer. Then the retailer only can issue a e-invoice to them. So this one will be for those retailer. I believe they will have a two approach. One approach will be scenario 2, and another approach will be scenario 1 for those special requests by those customer that they want to get an e-invoice for income tax deduction purpose. Okay, so this is the overview of the two scenario for the e-invoice. Then talking about, just I mentioned about the required field. I think these are the information in the guideline mentioned is a compulsory field that you have to stated in the e-invoice. So you can see there are quite many information that you have to obtain from your supplier and your customer. So firstly, it's talking about the supplier name and buyer name. Then another one will be the supplier tax identification number, TIN. So supplier business registration or IC number, ID, or passport number. And then there are SST number if those suppliers are subject to SST, sales tax or service tax number. And then and if those supplier is hotel, they may have a tourism tax registration number, supplier email contact, and also the supplier MSIC code means that is their business industry code. We also need to obtain from the supplier, and the supplier business activity description, whether this supplier is a trading company or whether it's an investment holding company or construction developer. All these business description we have to mention in the invoice also. Then talking about customer side, same thing, customer income tax number, customer business registration number or IC number or passport number, and their SST number, email address. Then talking about, email address. Then talking about physical office address will be 14 and 15. Then the contact number, phone number. So these are the compulsory. The e-invoice version, I think, is given by the income tax department. I think it depends on what are the version they are using the e-invoice. E-invoice type, like just now, is the e-invoice or is a consolidation e-invoice. So it's a different type. Then e-invoice code. I think another 121 talking about original e-invoice reference number. This could be your own invoicing number, your company own invoicing number, and e-invoice date and time, the date and time of validation. I think IRB mentioned that how long they will take the time for validation. They say it's very within 2 or 3 seconds. It's very fast. It's not very long. So I think it's not an issue for timing purpose. Then supplier digital signature, invoice currency code, whether you are charging Malaysian ringgit or other currency. So you have to put in your currency rate also, because In Malaysia, you can issue invoice in other currency, but you also have to have one column mention how much is in RM, Ringgit Malaysia. That's why you need to put in RM column and exchange rate. So the others will be optional. It's not compulsory that you need to state it in the e-invoice. Will be the frequency of the billing period. Maybe this billing period is talking about your month and also your accounting period. So compulsory one is the total amount of the invoice, total excluding tax and total including tax. Some of them may be subject to sales or service tax. Others will be the optional, will be a quantity, measurement, discount rate, discount amount, and then payment mode, supplier bank account number, payment term, payment amount, payment date, payment reference number, and the bill reference number. So based on the IRB technical guideline, you can see from the 51 required fields, 38 are mandatory field, means that 38 are compulsory. It must you must have in the tax invoice. Only 13 are optional field. So you can imagine I think now many company, they only have certain information of their supplier and customer, like maybe only the address, name, maybe email address, contact number. Others information they may not have, like income tax number, SST number, business MSIC code, business description. All this they don't have. That's why in order to implement this e-invoice, first thing you have to consider how you're going to obtain the information from your supplier and customer in order to get ready for your e-invoice system. You cannot wait until, let's say you're going to implement e-invoice on 1st of July, only you get ready. You have to get ready before 1st of July. You have to make sure the system is ready. The system has all this database before you can start e-invoice on 1st of July next year for those SME company. Okay, so this one they have to take note and also have to consider how they're going to implement this part to obtain the information from customer and supplier. Okay, then talking about consolidated e-invoice scenario. IRB income tax guideline also mentioned that this industry is not allowed to use consolidated invoice. Means that this industry, all these 7 industry, they have to issue e-invoice, and every e-invoice must have all the customer name, address, etc. So that's why all this industry must using e-invoice scenario 1. So I think person is talking about automotive, those car retailer, especially luxury car retailer, aviation, sales of flight ticket or private charter, and luxury goods and jewelry, those like LV bag, Rolex watch, all these kind of shop, they have to using e-invoice, must get the customer particular. And then construction, so contractor must issue e-invoice. They cannot issue invoice without the customer particular. And other will be the wholesaler and the retailer of construction material. Same thing. And this one I will foresee that there are certain challenge for those hardware shop. Malaysia, a lot of hardware shop. They are not only selling to the contractor, they also selling to the very like household consumer. So household consumer, how you make sure all the hardware shop able to get all the customer particular. I think this one will be the challenge for the hardware shop. That's why I think we have to wait for a while and see late in the future whether this guideline will be updated or not. So all this Malaysia sometimes they implement something after getting some feedback from the market or from the taxpayer. I think IRB will change a bit on their guideline and on their requirements. So we have to wait for this kind of update from time to time. Okay, then another one with the license betting and gaming, like those Magnum, Toto, Gending Casino, all these they cannot issue so-called the consolidated e-invoice, because a casino, when some people win money, then the casino need to give the price, so it's a cost to the casino. So this one, the casino have to issue so-called the sell bill invoice on behalf of the so-called the customer. Later we'll touch on the self bill. Okay, so casino, all these Toto, Magnum, they cannot issue a consolidated e-invoice. Then another one will be the payment to the agent, dealer, and distributor. So this one is something like for those like insurance agent, for those like multi-level marketing agent. Sometimes those multi-level marketing agent, they have many agents. Some agent may have a business registration. Those agents have a business registration, then they also have to register and implement e-invoice. I think that one is not a problem. The agent can issue e-invoice to the insurance company, to the MLM company. But sometimes MLM company may have an agent like a household, like those housewife, they are not working, they are just doing part-time selling product on for the MLM company. Those household housewife, they may not have a business entity. So then this kind of a scenario, the MLM company can issue self-bill also. Later we'll talk about what are the business allowed to using a self-bill. Self-bill means that you issue invoice on behalf of your supplier, the service supplier. So means that, for example, you are my agent, you help me to sell product. Supposedly you should bill me your commission, but because you are not business entity, you do not implement e-invoice, then I have to help you on your behalf to issue invoice to myself. That's why we call a self-bill. I think in the GST time also, many of us come across self-bill, this concept. Okay, then this is the self-bill that I mentioned just now. So what are the businesses allowed to using self-bill, like those payment to agent, etc. E-commerce transaction, especially those that you import goods from overseas, because you buy goods from overseas, the overseas supplier may not have a Malaysian income tax number, so the overseas supplier is not able to implement the e-invoice of Malaysia. That's why you have to issue self-bill for those import goods from overseas, and also the services that provided by the foreigners. So this one is a self-bill. And goods sold and service rendered by foreign suppliers, just as I mentioned, the self-bill for those import and the services performed by the foreigners. And pay out to all those betting and gaming, just as I already mentioned, like casino, Magnum, Toto, all this. And dividend. Now dividend, in the guideline they mentioned that only for those dividend that they are subject to this section 108 deduction, only required to do self-bill. If those dividend declared under single tier system, they are not required to do the self-billing. I believe now I think most of the company dividend are franked under the single tier system. That's why I believe most of the dividend should be considered required to using self-bill. Then another one will be the acquisition of goods and service from individual taxpayer who are not conducting the business. Just I already mentioned, like MLM, you may have an agent like a housewife, all these are not doing business, then you can issue self-bill on their behalf. So these are scenario that IRB allowed those business using the self-bill. Okay, then you may also come across talking about your employee side. I think employee sometimes employee they don't need to issue employee they do not need to issue any e-invoice, because employee is not considered doing business, they are under employment. But sometimes your staff, your employee may need to incur certain expenses for the company and claim back from the company. And also company also give them some benefit like traveling allowance, parking allowance, all this. So how the so-called business to substantial this kind of expenses under this e-invoice system. Now I think IRB also noticed that if you need to require your staff every invoice to get the e-invoice for the company, sometimes may be also troublesome, like those parking fee, car maintenance charges that the company pay for the staff. Then the IRB give some concession. Either you must get the e-invoice under the company name, or if the e-invoice is under the staff name, is still allowable for tax deduction, provided this one must be mentioned in your company policy that what are the benefits that you have provided to your staff. only those benefits that you mention in your policy, then only you can enjoy this concession, either the e-invoice under company name or the staff name. For those staff, maybe sometimes they purchase from Lazada or maybe so-called Shopee. Sometimes it's from the overseas supplier. So all these they are not required to using issue sell bill. You are using the foreigners invoice is still allowed for tax deduction purpose. This is a concession given by the IRB for those employment benefit. Same thing for those expenses that the employee or staff that they pay, later they want to claim back. Like for example, sometimes the staff help the company to buy some biscuit, refreshment, Milo, coffee for for our pantry purpose. So this one, same thing. They still need to get e-invoice, but it's either under the company name or the staff name. So this one is a concession given by the income tax. Okay, so same thing must be clearly stated in the employer's policy about this. Okay, then talking about you may have some scenario will be like this, talking about reimbursement and disbursement. You are maybe just an agent, like even like us accounting firm also very common. Sometimes we need to do a special advisory work. We need to work with the lawyer or other professional, and sometimes maybe the lawyer will bill directly to my customer their lawyer fee, and I help my customer pay first to the lawyer. Later I will claim back the money from my customer. So these are the scenario. If let's say the supplier A already issue invoice directly to the customer, and let's say B is me, chain call help the customer pay to the supplier A first. Later they claim back the money from the customer. So the supplier B, they cannot include this amount, the so-called the payment on behalf included in the e-invoice that supplier B issued to the customer. Because why? Because the customer A already issued invoice to supplier A already issued invoice to customer. So B only can show the receipt to the customer and claim back the payment, and the supplier B only can issue invoice for the fee for their supplier B. So means that the supplier B only can issue invoice for their fee only, excluding the payment paid to the supplier A, because the supplier A issue invoice under the name of the customer. So if let's say you want to include this amount in the invoice, like let's say I'm a supplier B, if let's say I pay the money to supplier A, I want to include this amount in my invoice. If you want to do this, then you have to make sure the scenario will be the supplier A issue invoice to supplier B. The invoice must be under the supplier B name. Then the supplier B only issue invoice bill back to the customer, including the payment to the supplier A. So this one is a scenario. It's talking about how you arranging the billing. If let's say you arrange the billing, all the supplier bill to you first, and then only you make payment on behalf of your customer. Later, you issue bill, you include all the expenses, including your own fee. Then only you bill back your customer and ask your customer pay back to you in a lump sum amount. Okay, so this one will be some billing arrangement for those people involving reimbursement and disbursement scenario, like professional like us, lawyer, accountant, architect, engineer, all are very common for this kind of reimbursement and disbursement scenario. And then now I think basically that's all for my sharing. And I know there are certain scenario that I think people need to take note. Is talking about just now you're talking about after you go through all the site, I think first thing you need also to reconsider about your employee staff claim. Because why? Because your employee must also understand what is e-invoice. If they don't understand, next time they incur certain expenses, they want to claim back from the company, and the invoice they get from the supplier is not the e-invoice, is there's no name, then the company will have a difficulty to claim the tax deduction. I think first thing you need to have a very short briefing to brief about all your staff what is meant by e-invoice and what they need to get in the future if they want to claim back certain expenses from the company. And then your self-claim form also have to maybe you have to design two type of form. I think first type of form will be with e-invoice, another form is without e-invoice. And then talking about second one, you need to take note is those sometimes business may have a many arrangement. I think I have a client come across will be my client case will be like, for example, very common will be the contractor. Contractor sometimes they engage many illegal worker. Okay, illegal foreign worker. So foreign workers, supposedly they are not your employee, they are the subcontractor. So those illegal foreign worker, they should issue invoice to you to bill you about their contract sum. But under the e-invoice system, those illegal foreign worker, they are not able to register e-invoice because why? They are illegal. They are not able to register tax file number. So if they are not able to register the tax file number, they are not able to using e-invoice and give you the e-invoice. So that's why you will facing this kind of expenses that you may not have an e-invoice because they are illegal foreign worker. So this one also they have to consider about this kind of arrangement. Okay, I think there are many different company may have some special different arrangement. That's why all this they have to look into that to see how to rearrange their internal process. I think that's all for my sharing. I will more welcome is more on this Q&A section. I believe there are many questions that in many taxpayer mind that they want to find out. So I pass back to MC, then I see any question that from the floor. Thanks for the participation. I pass back to MC. Thanks.
Thank you very much to Mr. Lam's insightful presentation. Okay, so next up, we have the consulting manager from DigiwinSoft Malaysia, Mr. Wong Kar-jun, who will enlighten us on the solution available for e-invoices. Let's welcome Mr. Wong Kar-jun.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. As our government announced that we will be implementing e-invoice this year, today we will talk about how what are actually e-invoice meant to businesses and how to get ready for the e-invoice. Okay, so as DigiWin has been implementing e-invoice in China and Taiwan for many years, we have the experience and the understanding on how e-invoice will impact on businesses. Therefore, this brings up to our agenda today. We will talk about how businesses prepare the requirement for the e-invoice and how to overcome the challenges for the e-invoice. Then, based on our experience on implementing e-invoice in other countries, how our solution helps the businesses to overcome the gaps between the business and e-invoice. Finally, we will talk about how businesses could leverage the benefit from the e-invoice and how to getting on board for the e-invoice. So coming in for today's meeting, I believe these are the questions pop up in our mind when we heard of the e-invoice. So we have been thinking what actually e-invoice are and how does it impact on our business. So from the company point of view, probably we'll be thinking on, are there any penalty for us if we fail to compile the e-invoice? What are the costs on implementing the e-invoice and how to seamlessly integrate our business flows with the e-invoice for the Malaysia? From the finance manager, we might be thinking how to submit the e-invoice to the government, and do I have to what are the frequencies for us to submit the e-invoice every time, and is the submitting process simple and user-friendly? So all these questions that bring us in today to discuss on Malaysia e-invoice, how does it impact on our businesses? Okay, so based on our experience on dealing e-invoice before in other countries, when we wanted to implement e-invoice, we are not talking simply on just outputting the soft copy or just upload the information to the government itself only. So we wanted to find ways on how to leverage the e-invoice to enhance our financial process efficiency and ultimately improve our overall operation flow. But to get there, we have to ask ourselves, are we ready for the e-invoice? So some of the question we might need to ask ourselves is how to seamlessly combine my businesses with the e-invoice requirement? Does my current invoice meet up to the e-invoice requirements? Does my employee knows the rules and regulation of the e-invoice and how to prevent the mistake and adjustment? So implementing e-invoice is just a start, but for businesses is how does we leverage and how does we enhance our internal process flow from the e-invoice. Okay, so what are the requirements for us to prepare for the e-invoice? We are not only talking about the rules and regulation of the e-invoice, but from a business standpoint, what should we do to prepare for the e-invoice? Based on DigiWin past experiences, we summarize out that we have to focus in these three sectors in order for business to prepare ourselves for the e-invoice. First of all, business need to have the knowledge for the e-invoice from the management until the users, until the employee inside the company. Because right now, e-invoice will now serve as an auditing process internally and externally. Not only internally, you have to audit your invoicing procedure and your invoicing information. When we upload to LHDN, of course, LHDN will have to validate our invoice information as well. So, which means we have to establish the correct procedure will be crucial for the businesses. Secondly, we have to identify what kind of invoice type and procedure we have in our businesses. In order to compile the e-invoice into our daily flow, we need to understand the gaps between the e-invoice requirement and our business process flow so that we would know that how does we seamlessly integrate the e-invoice into our business procedure. Lastly, when we need to submit the e-invoice, we need to understand and we need to have all the information required inside the e-invoice for us to submit successfully to the LHDN. So based on the latest information from the government, we have a total of 51 fields when submitting the e-invoice. Some of it is mandatory, some of it is optional. So do we have the gaps between generating all this information and submit to the LHDN? Okay. So from the external environment, let us see what will be inside the e-invoice. We have to compile the e-invoice based on the latest guideline from the government. So some of the example is how does we perform the submission procedure? What are the rules and regulations required during the submission? How does the transaction is validated? How to cancel if the e-invoice is mistakenly submitted? Does different transaction body have different requirement? So all this information are required, business are required to understand and to have the knowledge when we proceeding the e-invoice. So next, after understanding the requirement of the e-invoice, we have to come back inside to our internal process. So when we talk about internal procedure, we have to identify how many types of invoices or what kind of invoice transaction do we have? So are there any different scenario for the same type of invoices? Thus, our procedure able to fulfill the e-invoice requirement, and what are our invoice issue frequency, and will it able to compile to the e-invoice requirement? All this information, all our invoice procedure, we require to identify and to validate again, because we have to understand all these procedure have to comply with the e-invoice requirement. If we fail to do so, probably we will be facing any penalty or any further punishment from the government. Okay. Lastly, we have to dig inside to the e-invoice itself. So based on the example or the guidelines from the guidelines, the invoice have a total of 51 fields, with some of the fields are optional. So we have to ask ourselves, are we able to generate all these fields for the e-invoice? Do we need to manually enter all this data when we submitting all the e-invoice? How can we embed the validation code and the QR code into the e-invoice after the LHDN validated our e-invoice? Do we have any gap of doing all these requirements, or currently are we able to output all this information? So if we fail to do so, you will be probably facing like a manual adjustment or any back and forth procedure to submit just one single invoice. Okay, so now let us go to the next agenda for today. So with DigiWin experience of implementing E-invoice before in other countries, how does our solution help businesses to overcome the challenge of the E-invoice? So as some of us might knowing right now, there are two ways for us to submit the E-invoice. One of the way is we have to log in into My Invoice portal, which is hosted by the LHDN, to let businesses to submit their e-invoice when the transaction is happen. We have to fill in the necessary field from the into the e-invoice inside the portal. It is something similar like we have to submit our personal income tax every year in the LHDN PE form. So it's just the differences is we have to submit the e-invoice when the transaction happen, or at least once a month for the consolidated invoices. The another way is to leverage the system to integrate with the My Invoice portal, which is in a technical term, we are building the API between our current system, for example, ERP or your financial system, building the API between our system with the My Invoice portal system. This helps businesses to directly upload the invoice information to the My Invoice portal when a transaction happens within the business. So based on the current information when the government provided, so let us have a simple simulation on the scenario how to submit the invoice into My Invoice portal. So for example, today we have made a transaction for 20 types of item today. Right now, the transaction is completed. We have to issue the invoice of these 20 items to the customer. Right now, aside issue the invoice from our side, we have to log in into My Invoice portal to fill in the required field from the e-invoices. So we have to key in around 40 mandatory field, and some of other field is optional, but depends on scenario. Probably we have to key in as well. Then we have to wait for My Invoice portal to validate and provide the validated code to us after the e-invoice is submitted. Then we have to embed the QR code and the validated code into our soft copy e-invoice and share to our customer. After sharing the customer the invoice to the customer from the customer side, we are able to view to monitor the status of the e-invoice or to cancel the e-invoice from the soft copy given by the supplier. So as we could see right now, the submitting process still require human to interfere, which will lower down the efficiency of the process because we have to manually input the field, and the e-invoice, the invoice information is breakdown. We have to key in from our side, and then we have to key in back to the LHDN side as well. So this is a very inefficient way and easily might cause mistake during the submission. Then after we submitted the invoice to the portal, we have to wait for the portal to do the validation. Even if the portal validate within the 3 seconds, however, during your submission, if there are any fields that you key in wrongly, probably you have to readjust and amend the field again, which causing us to probably duplicate our process on validating or duplicate our key in again for the submission. Of course, after the validator is completed, it only notifies certain registered account inside the LHDN database, which means that probably we have to build in the contact inside the LHDN so that the LHDN could help us to notify our customer. Finally, we have to manually share the invoice to the customer. Therefore, we have to put another effort to put in the QR code into the E-invoice, which is a duplicated process because we have to wait for the QR code from the LHDN, and this is a back and forth process. We cannot one shot to complete everything under one transaction and then to send to our customer. So this is how E-invoice is submitted inside My Invoice portal if we are using the portal to submit our invoice. Okay, so in the end, the process will be manual and time taken. Need to break down our process to validate because we have to validate another time, and duplicate and disconnected flow because we have to come back to our invoice again to fill in the validated code from the LHDN. Okay, so from our solution for the E-invoice API, we are looking for a seamless transaction to submit the E-invoice to My Invoice portal with the API integration. So using the same scenario, today we have a transaction happens for same 20 types of item invoice need to send to the customer. Then on the same interface, we are submitting the E-invoice to the LHDN directly. So without having need to log in into the LHDN portal, on our own interface, we are able to submit the information with the integration to the LHDN My Invoice portal. That all this submission will be automated when you decide to submit the invoice from our system itself. After that, LHDN will proceed to the validation process to ensure the information is correct. Then it will send back the notification back to our system, which means we will be receiving the validation code directly after the E-invoice is validated from LHDN. So our transaction program, for example, the DO or the invoice will have the validation code from the LHDN. Then we could share the validated invoice to our customer. We can choose to email our customer directly from the same interface. Okay, so this is how our solution helps businesses to proceed the E-invoice with the API solution. So it is a single interface solution, which means that the process is seamless and automated through the transaction. Then we are able to adapt to multiple invoice scenario. For example, one DO, one invoice, multiple DO, one invoice, monthly transaction to one invoice, or other examples like the deposit invoice. We are able to adapt to multiple invoice scenario. Then before uploading, of course, from our side, we will do the validation together as well. For example, we will validate the business's information, the customer information, and the transaction information. Finally, we are able to automatically share the validated invoice to the customer with an email option directly. So just now we talked about how our API solution help businesses to seamlessly connect our procedure with the E-invoice submission. So what about other issue related to the E-invoice? Since right now I am able to seamlessly adapt to the E-invoice, and E-invoice become an auditing point for us to control and to audit most of our procedure. Can I do more to solve other issues? For example, can we trace all the related documents from just the E-invoice number? can I automate my overall business process until the e-invoice with approval? Can I get the actual cost and the product margin from the e-invoice itself? So aside from providing the API solution for the e-invoice upload to the LHDN, we do have other feature from our solution as well, which is a one-source document generation procedure. So for example, from the sales order, after our procedure is standardized from the sales order, we can directly generate out our production and purchase planning, which is we are using the one source of document to generate this transaction. Then we are able to output our works order and purchase order. After that, when the works order and the purchase order, the transaction, the receiving and the production is completed, we will come back to our inventory, which finally will deliver to our customers. So we have notification to notify when the the production is complete or the process is complete. Then we are able to arrange for delivery. Then after the delivery is completed or after the deal is been issued, we can directly proceed to the e-invoice processing, which helps us to upload our information to the LHDN. So after the invoice from the supplier or our invoice issued to the customer has been validated, we can directly generate our AR and AP immediately. After that, when we do our monthly closing, our AR and AP could directly generate into our income statement and balance sheet. So we could design the procedure flow and the notification approval to the user. And also, we are able to directly generate the following documents from the process flow if we have been standardizing our procedure. We are able to integrate the approval process as well during the procedure has been executed. For example, during the process, before I move to the next process, I have to receive approval from my HOD. We are able to integrate the approval process as well. Finally, all these transaction and documents can be linked under one sales order number or one e-invoice numbering to prevent the data are tallied in between transactions. So aside from we are able to generate those documents and from one single source, of course, we are able to do the multiple dimensional tracing from one single source. So for example, right now I only have the e-invoice information. I am able to trace horizontally between my from my DO and sales order and my account and my financial statement report. So we are able to trace horizontally in between those transactions from the e-invoice information. Then we are able to trace the vertical transaction as well, because from sales order, we are generating production orders or purchase order from the sales order, and the purchase order probably will have invoices to the account payable and to the AP side of the general ledger. So all these transactions, we are able to trace vertical as well from the single source and its continuous process. Furthermore, we can perform detailed tracing as well. For example, from my delivery batch, what are my purchase batch from the supplier? What are my production batch from the supplier, from our production line? And what are my delivery batch from my inventory to my customer? So we are able to pinpoint from the delivery detail itself and from the source of the production or the purchase as well. So finally, we are able to reflect the actual cost inside the e-invoice to reflect the profit margin from the e-invoice perspective, item product perspective, and the customer margin itself. So since we are able to output the material costs, the labor costs, the overhead costs, and the subcon costs from our solution as well, we are able to identify the invoice, the product within the invoice, the actual cost itself. So in the end, you want to summarize everything under one dashboard or one interface. We are able to see our total sales, our customer sales, our invoice sales and costs, our customer margin, and our average product margin, and our invoice collection rate. We are able to output this dashboard or report to help businesses to have a really understanding on their current business operation. So lastly, came back to the e-invoice itself. How does e-invoice will benefit the businesses, and how businesses, what businesses need to be done to be getting on board for the e-invoice? Okay, so we have to ask ourselves, why does the government need businesses to implement e-invoice? From the government perspective view, the government requires the businesses to obligate to the financial and tax duty to enhance their transaction transparency and accountability, and require businesses to perform the company's social and environment responsibilities. So how implementing e-invoice will benefit the businesses? In a simple term, we are able to achieve a seamless and accurate business operation in a timely manner, fulfilling businesses' financial and tax duty, contributing to the social responsibility and the environment sustainability. So in order for us to get to the e-invoice, we have to enhance our business management. We have to enhance the connection between process to meet up to the e-invoice requirement. We have to interface or to implement various systems to achieve interconnection or cross-network integration between systems. Of course, we have to train the employee to be more sufficient and to prevent error during the procedure execution. So coming to this, we are able to enhance our business management. Of course, we are providing transparent and complete transaction information to the government. So we are able to achieve a robust and complete financial business operation and accounting performance. And we are proactively cooperate with government policy to reduce any tax risk or tax deduction. So of course, we have been taken account to the interest of other stakeholders and safeguarding our customer or consumer right, because our transaction is transparent and been validated. Finally, implementing e-invoice will be cost saving and environment friendly, because we are saving the effort to storing the actual document for the invoices. We are saving the cost for purchasing the e-invoice paper, and paperless businesses helps the sustaining the overall environment. So these are the benefits that businesses implementing e-invoicing. So last but not least, how businesses getting on board for the e-invoice, and how we build our own roadmap to kickstart the e-invoice journey. So the first step is to understand the rules and regulations and identify our e-invoice businesses implementing stage. Second, we have to perform an internal education and to motivate our management to employee to compile to the e-invoice procedure and to enhance our business procedure. The third step is we have to streamline the internal procedure and to identify our requirements, so that what are the gaps between e-invoice and our current procedure. After identify the gap, seek the related service provider for solution on how we overcome all these obstacles. Then we have to generate the timeline and implement our e-invoice procedure. finally, we have to execute the PCDA method, plan, do, check, assessment to constantly review and improve our procedure. That's all for from my side for today's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for the informative presentation by Mr. Wong on the solutions. Next up, we have Ms. Lee Xin-Yi, Customer Service Manager from DigiwinSoft Malaysia, who will introduce us to the current customer service offering by DigiWin. Let's welcome Ms. Lee Xin-Yi.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to see, I'm Xin-Yi, Customer Service Manager from DSU Consulting. I'm happy to see both familiar faces and new friends joining us today. As we move into the final sections of our seminar, I will be sharing and summarize the key points regarding the preparation for the e-invoicing. So, how do we start? Before we get into the main topic, I believe that all of the company are currently using many systems. I think it's maybe more than one, just such as CRM, accounting software, ERP, or maybe BPM. Okay, therefore, most of the company will have their own server, right? So, have you ever experienced issues such as virus attack, data loss, or hardware failure? So this all situation can cause the system not function properly and your employee unable to carry out their daily tasks. And this is a significant impact on your daily operation because it will cause the inability to access your data and lead to impaired decision making. So, and lastly, it will cause your reputation damage because you can't issue your DO on time because you can't go in access your system and you can't do some decision due to you can't see the information like your stock, your current production situations, or your production that plan to do today. Okay, and the result you're considering have do some improvement in your IT environment, such as your performance, cybersecurity, or some IT solutions. So in case you might think that you wish to hire an in-house IT. However, for most of the SME company, unless there are specific projects to execute, IT might be underutilization for day-to-day issue, making it quite challenges to give a good career path to your in-house IT. So if something like maybe 1 week you just have 1 to 2 issues that you need your in-house IT to solve it, so hiring an in-house IT might seems like a waste. Of course, you can do like you can subscribe to the service from your outsourcing vendor. This is another options. But aside for the cost factor, then might you have a concern that maybe your partner whether is trustful or whether they can provide a very good service. So in this case, before this, DigiWin with our service will primarily focus on software support for QA your system users or resolving bugs. But however, in 2024, we will be introducing a new service to provide our customer with one-stop service. This included our service support, infrastructure, and even for the end user PC management. So for clients without the in-house IT support, we serve you as a outsourced IT. For those clients which have their in-house IT, will become your IT consultant, assisting you to handle your IT issue faster and more efficiency. So with regularly monitoring maintenance, and it can help you to prevent server down and ensure the continuous of your business operations. Our primary goal for this service is to ensure that clients have a secure and stable IT environment, reducing the risk of disruptions to your daily operations. Okay, so it's allows organization to concentrate on their core business activity, not affected by those system issues. Okay, so with a secure IT environment, the transition to a new system or the implementations of e-serving becomes much more smoother. So now let's get back to the topic. So in the preparation for e-invoicing implementation, we have 5 steps. We summarize it into 5 steps. The first, you need to identify your implementation stage. Second, you need to do some internal educations. Third, review your invoicing process. And fourth, evaluate your current software, billing software. Okay. And the last is proceed to implementations. So in this first step, identify the business implementation stage to estimate the preparation timeline accurately. I think just now Mr. Lam have mentioned, and also KJ, also Mr. Wong also mentioned, there are 3 stages. First is August 2024 with tax payable with annual turnover more than 100 millions. And the second is January 2025, which between 25 million to 100 million tax payable. And the rest will all implement on July 2025. Okay, so I think everyone already have very clear that which stage is your company in. So the second step, make sure your internal staff at least have a basic understanding of e-invoicing, regulations and rules. So especially your billing staff, finance, IT, and also management level. Okay, you may do some research online, like YouTube. I think there's a lot of video regarding e-invoicing. You can go and have study, or you can join seminar on e-invoicing topic, such like today. So I think everyone today already in this stage. So next step, we need to go and review the current company invoicing process and see the content whether they comply with the e-invoicing standard. So I summarized 3 main information things that you need to be careful to make sure that you have comply with the standard. The first is you need to review your timing of invoice insurance. Whether the timing of your invoice insurance is okay with your submission of e-invoicing, because they have a timing of 30 days. I think the next month, this month invoice, you need to submit before the next month. So you need to confirm your timing of your invoice insurance is commit to your submission of e-invoicing to the My Invoice portal. The second thing is the mandatory data field. I think Mr. Lam just now mentioned there are a few some fields that need mandatory in your system. So you need to review that currently your system whether have those fields inside your buyer side. Okay. So the third is your documentation, that invoice, CN, and DM. So you may review your whole invoicing process first and see whether there's things that you need to prepare at first before you go into your implementations. Okay. So the next part, we will come to your software part. So before you're going through, because you need to understand whether your current system have development in your e-invoicing part. Let's say maybe it developed in with API or without API. So there are 2 methods. One is just now I mentioned with or without API. If without API, this part will be using manually key in into My Invoice portal, or you will using a spreadsheet to upload. Okay, so this is more suitable for those clients which doesn't have large volume of data or transactions. Okay, but you need to make sure whether your current system able to export the spreadsheet to upload. If can't, then you need to manually key in. Okay, or you're planning to issue invoice directly by using the My Invoice portal in future. Okay, so if with API, this is more suitable to those high volume of transactions, but this may require upfront investment. That means there are costs for adjustment to existing system. So you need to discuss with your current software vendor whether they have any costs. So there's a 2 way to do API. One is direct integration. Direct integration, which means that your current software company, they will do the development in API. So after you maybe do some version update, you may directly input the data into my invoice portal that IRB database. Okay, so this will minimize the risk of data discrepancy or the inconsistency. Okay, if your current system doesn't relevant in API, so you might integrate with through the middleware. This require minimal adjustment to your existing ERP or billing system, but this may have another cost, and most of the middleware might be charged by subscriptions or the volume of transaction. So you need to identify whether your current software company is doing the API or not. Okay. So this is a flaw that I let you make your mind into whether you need to find another solutions or you can proceed on your current system. Okay, so you need to you need to confirm that your current billing system or current ERP, whether they develop API. Okay, so you can see if they plan to develop API, is there any costs? Yes or no? So you can see, yes, they are developing the API. So is there any costs? If yes, whether you could afford the cost. If no, you might find another solution. If yes, whether you accept the solution. If yes, then you may start the implementation. You may plan the schedule with your vendor. So if there doesn't have any cost, so if you accept the solution, so you may start the implementation immediately. If your current system doesn't have the technique to do the development in API, could the current system provide another method? If yes, is the method convenient to your company operation? If yes, then you may start implementation. If no, could you accept key in or output the spreadsheet manually? Okay, so if no, you may find another solutions lah. But if from the beginning, the current billing system doesn't do any update on e-invoicing, then you only could key in manually or output the spreadsheet manually. So in the end, you might need to find another solution. Another solution in here that you can be middleware software, or you plan to change your billing system lah. Okay. So this will based on your current company situations, and you consider those factors and determine the solutions. Okay, so last we come to implementation. You need to have a plan for implementation. For example, for our current ERP, in this example, the implementation stage is August 2024. Okay, so this schedule is our estimate timeline, and it might change according government's announcements or actions. Okay, so in January to April, we will do cost estimations and confirm the solution with client. Okay, in May, we will discuss with client to arrange a schedule for system update, and we will ask for some details. Okay, to prepare some mandatory fields or those details they need to ask for from the buyers. Okay, and the next stage we will on June and July we will plan to do a system update and do some testing, and later on we also will do some problem solving. Okay, last August 2024 we will go live for the e-invoicing implementations, and we will continuous doing support and review. Okay. So in our side, development in API, we will do the API with the LHDM portal, that's equal to the My Invoice portal, by using software development kit, SDK. But currently, we're still waiting for LHDM release the API SDK and to launch the My Invoice portal. So for existing client, we will email the details after this seminar to discuss the further actions. And for new client, you may leave your questions in our Q&A later. So we will answer your question if you have any question after listening our whole seminar. So that's all for my part today. And thank you for your listening.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. for the comprehensive introduction to Digiwin's diverse customer service offering. Thank you all for watching online today. We hope that the excellent content from the three speakers will be beneficial for your company in implementing e-invoicing. We invite you to fill out the event survey now using the QR code on the screen or the link in the chat room. This will help us better serve you. Thank you again for your viewership and goodbye.